In the vast expanse of space, where survival depends on unity and no one gets left behind, what happens when that sacred code is broken? When the wounded become burdens and compassion becomes a luxury few can afford? Across 1,000 worlds, advanced civilizations have learned to calculate the value of life in cold, mathematical terms. Resources are finite. Time is precious. The weak slow down the strong, and, in the endless war for survival among the stars, mercy has become an extinct emotion. But they never met a human. They never encountered a species so fundamentally broken that they would risk everything for a stranger. A species so illogically wired that they see worth where others see waste, hope where others see hopelessness. A species that refuses to accept that some lives don't matter. This is the story of what happens when human stubbornness meets alien logic. When one injured soul, abandoned by her own kind, discovers that sometimes the most unlikely savior comes from the most unexpected place. When the galaxy learns that humans don't just refuse to leave their own behind, they refuse to leave anyone behind. Prepare to witness why humanity's greatest weakness might just be their most terrifying strength. The pain came in waves, each pulse of agony synchronized with the distant rumble of engines growing fainter by the minute. Zarath pressed her scaled hand against the gaping wound in her side, purple blood seeping between her clawed fingers as she watched the last transport ship disappear into the crimson sky of Kepler 442b. They had left her. Her own unit, her own people, the Veltar warriors she had fought beside for 3 rotations, had made the calculation and found her wanting. The math was simple, brutal, and final: 1 injured soldier versus the safety of 12 healthy ones. The pursuing Hrektar forces would be here within hours, and a limping Veltar would only slow their escape. Commander Thexil had not even looked back. Zarath slumped against the twisted wreckage of their downed scout ship, the metal still warm from the crash that had shattered her left leg and torn a hole in her torso. The emergency beacon blinked uselessly beside her, its signal range barely extended beyond the immediate crash site. Even if another Veltar ship received it, they would make the same calculation her unit had made. She was already dead. They just hadn't buried her yet. The desert wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying the scent of iron and ozone from the distant battlefield where the Hrektar and Veltar forces had clashed for the better part of a local day. Both sides had withdrawn to regroup, leaving behind only the dead, the dying, and the forgotten. Zarath belonged to the last category now. She closed her yellow eyes and tried to remember her training about honorable death. A Veltar warrior was supposed to face the end with dignity, accepting that their individual life was less important than the survival of their people. The greater good always superseded personal desire. It was the foundation of their civilization, the principle that had allowed them to survive and thrive among the stars for over 2,000 rotations. But knowing the logic did not make the abandonment hurt less. A sound in the distance made her eyes snap open. The deep throb of engines, but different from the Veltar transports. Heavier, more primitive. Her blood went cold as she recognized the signature Hrektar patrol ships. They must have detected the crash site and come to investigate. Zarath fumbled for her plasma rifle, her movements clumsy and weak. The weapon's power cell showed less than 10% charge remaining. Enough for maybe a dozen shots before it died completely. Against a Hrektar patrol squad, it might as well be a sharp stick. The ships grew louder, their shadows falling across the wreckage as they circled overhead like carrion birds. Zarath gritted her teeth and prepared for her final battle. At least she would die fighting, even if no one would sing songs of her last stand. But the Hrektar ships did not land. They hovered for several long minutes, scanning the area with their sensor arrays, then moved on toward the horizon. Zarath waited until the sound faded completely before allowing herself to breathe again. They had dismissed her as already dead, just like her own people. The irony was not lost on her. Hours passed. The binary suns began their slow descent toward the jagged mountains on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Zarath's condition continued to deteriorate. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but infection was setting in despite the emergency medical supplies she had managed to salvage from the wreck. Her vision blurred intermittently, and waves of fever made her shiver despite the desert heat. She had perhaps 1 local day left, maybe less. The thought should have brought despair, but instead Zarath found herself oddly calm. There was something almost peaceful about accepting the inevitable. No more pain, no more fear, no more fighting. Just the quiet embrace of darkness and the end of struggle. That peace was shattered by the sound of another engine. This one was different from both the Veltar and Rektar signatures she knew. Rougher, more irregular, with an almost musical quality to its harmonics. Zara-Th struggled to sit up straighter, raising her rifle with trembling hands. A ship descended from the darkening sky, its hull scarred and patched with what looked like a dozen different materials. It was smaller than the military vessel she was accustomed to, with an asymmetrical design that spoke of function over form. Makeshift armor plates had been welded over obvious weak points, and its weapons systems appeared to be cobbled together from multiple sources. A pirate ship, perhaps. Or a mercenary. The vessel touched down about 50 meters away, its landing gear digging deep furrows in the sandy soil. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a hatch opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and a figure emerged. Zara-Th had never seen anything like it. The creature was roughly humanoid but smaller than most sapient species, standing perhaps 1.75 meters in height. Its skin was a pale pinkish color, and it wore what appeared to be environmental armor of an unfamiliar design. Most disturbing were its eyes, small, forward-facing, and blue like the heart of a plasma flame. A predator's eyes. The being approached slowly, its hands raised in what might have been a gesture of peace. It spoke in a language Zara-Th did not recognize, the sound soft and strangely melodic. When she did not respond, the creature stopped about 10 meters away and activated what looked like a translation device. "Can you understand me now?" The voice was smooth, neither particularly deep nor high, with an odd quality that suggested the speaker was young. Zara-Th kept her rifle trained on the newcomer. "What do you want, alien? Have you come to claim salvage rights?" The being tilted its head in a gesture that somehow conveyed confusion. "Salvage? No, I picked up your distress beacon. I came to help." "Help?" Zara-Th almost laughed, the sound emerging as more of a wheeze. "I am dying, alien. My own people have abandoned me because I am too damaged to be worth saving. What help could you possibly offer?" "My name is Marcus," the creature said, taking another step closer. "And you're not dead yet. A technicality that will be corrected shortly." Marcus studied her with those unsettling blue eyes. "You're bleeding internally. Infection is setting in. Without proper medical treatment, you'll be dead within 18 hours. Your point being?" "My point being that 18 hours is enough time to fix you." Zara-Th stared at him. "Fix me? I am not some broken piece of equipment to be repaired. I am a warrior who has sustained mortal wounds in battle. There is honor in dying here." "There's more honor in living," Marcus replied. "May I come closer? I have medical supplies on my ship." "Why?" The question came out sharper than Zara-Th intended. "What possible reason could you have for helping me? You do not know me. I am not of your species. I offer you nothing in return." Marcus was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider the question seriously. "Because you need help," he said finally. "And I can provide it. That is not a reason. That is barely even a statement. It's the only reason I need." Zara-Th felt her grip on the rifle wavering as another wave of pain swept through her. "You are either very foolish or very dangerous." "Probably both," Marcus admitted with what might have been humor. "Will you let me help you?" Every instinct Zara-Th possessed screamed warnings. This was how predators operated. They approached injured prey with offers of aid, lulling victims into a false sense of security before striking. The creature called Marcus was clearly a predator species, with forward-facing eyes and the lean build of a hunter. His ship was armed and armored like a raider's vessel. And yet, there was something in his voice, some quality she could not identify, that gave her pause. Not sincerity exactly, any skilled deceiver could fake that. It was something deeper, more fundamental. A certainty that seemed to go beyond mere words. "If you are planning to kill me," Zara-Th said slowly, "you need only wait. Why waste medical supplies on a doomed effort?" "Because the effort isn't doomed," Marcus replied. "Not if you let me try." Another spasm of pain decided for her. Zara-Th let the rifle fall from nerveless fingers and slumped back against the wreckage. "Do what you will, alien. I am too weak to stop you anyway." Marcus moved quickly but carefully, approaching with his hands visible and his movements deliberate. Up close, Zara-TH could see that his environmental suit was indeed armor of some kind, but it was clearly designed for protection rather than intimidation. Various tools and instruments hung from attachment points on his belt and chest. He knelt beside her and began examining her wounds with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. His touch was gentle but sure, and when he activated a handheld scanner, Zara-TH was surprised by the sophistication of the device. "The good news is that no vital organs were damaged," Marcus said after a few minutes of scanning. "The bad news is that you've got internal bleeding, 3 broken ribs, a fractured tibia, and the beginning stages of sepsis from that abdominal wound. All of which add up to death," Zara-TH pointed out. "All of which add up to a very unpleasant few days if we don't get you proper treatment," Marcus corrected. "I'm going to give you something for the pain, then we need to get you to my ship." "Your ship?" "I've got a medical bay. Nothing fancy, but it's equipped to handle emergency surgery." Marcus was already preparing an injection device. "This might sting a bit." The pain relief was immediate and profound. For the first time in hours, Zara-TH could think clearly without the constant distraction of agony. "You are a medic?" "Among other things." Marcus carefully lifted her arm and began to slide it around his shoulders. "I'm going to need you to help me here. Can you put any weight on that leg?" "Some," Zara-TH admitted, though the attempt sent fresh waves of pain through her despite the medication. Together, they made the slow journey to Marcus's ship. Zara-TH had to lean heavily on the smaller being, and she was amazed by his strength. He supported nearly her full weight without apparent strain, never faltering even when she stumbled. The ship's interior was as eclectic as its exterior, with systems and equipment from at least a dozen different manufacturers jury-rigged together into what appeared to be a functional whole. Marcus guided her to a small medical bay that, while clearly improvised, contained equipment that looked surprisingly advanced. "Lie down here," he instructed, helping her onto an examination table. "I'm going to put you under for the surgery. When you wake up, you should be stable enough for proper healing." Zara-TH caught his arm as he reached for another injection device. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus paused, meeting her eyes. "I told you. Because you need help." "That is not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." He prepared the anesthetic. "Sleep now. When you wake up, we'll talk more." The last thing Zara-TH saw before the darkness took her was Marcus checking his instruments and beginning to lay out surgical tools. The last thing she thought was how strange it was that her potential savior was a creature she had never heard of, from a species that apparently valued life more than logic. It made no sense. But, then, very little about this day had made sense. As consciousness faded, Zara-TH found herself hoping she would live long enough to understand why a predator species had chosen mercy over profit, compassion over calculation. In all her years as a warrior, she had never encountered anything quite so puzzling. Or so unexpectedly comforting. The medical bay fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Outside, the alien sun set behind the mountains of Kepler 442b, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. And, in the darkness between stars, neither the Veltar nor the Hrektar had any idea that something new had entered their war. Something that refused to accept that the wounded were worthless. Something called human. Consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from the depths of a dark ocean. Zara-TH's first sensation was the absence of pain, not complete, but manageable. Her second was the unfamiliar scent of the air around her, carrying notes of metal and ozone mixed with something she could not identify. Her third was the sound of humming. The melody was unlike anything in Veltar musical tradition, with a structure that seemed almost random yet somehow pleasing. It rose and fell in patterns that her military-trained mind tried unsuccessfully to categorize as either a work song or a meditation chant. Zara-TH opened her eyes to find herself still in the medical bay, though someone had dimmed the lights to what was presumably a more comfortable level. The alien called Marcus sat at a workstation nearby, his attention focused on multiple screens displaying what appeared to be her vital signs and healing progress. He was still humming. "You are awake," Marcus said without turning around. "How do you feel?" Zara-TH took inventory of her body, testing each limb carefully. The sharp agony of her wounds had been replaced by a dull ache that spoke of healing rather than dying. When she probed the site of her abdominal injury, she found smooth synthetic skin covering what had been a ragged hole. Better, she admitted, surprised by how much better. How long was I unconscious? 36 hours, local time. You needed more surgery than I initially thought. Marcus turned to face her, and Zara-Th noticed dark circles under his eyes. The internal bleeding was worse than my scans showed, and cleaning out the infection took longer than expected. You have been awake this entire time? Someone needed to monitor your condition. Veltar physiology isn't exactly in my standard medical database. Zara-Th stared at him. The implications of what he was saying were staggering. He had performed complex surgery on an alien species using improvised techniques, then maintained a constant vigil to ensure her survival. Among her people, such dedication was reserved for family members or warriors of the highest honor. I do not understand, she said slowly. What is your species called? Human. We're from a world called Earth, about 1200 light years from here. And humans regularly risk themselves for unknown aliens? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Not all humans. But many of us, yes. It's kind of what we do. That makes no evolutionary sense, Zara-Th pointed out. Resources spent on unrelated individuals reduce the survival chances of your own genetic line. Evolution isn't everything, Marcus replied with that strange tone that might have been humor. Sometimes survival isn't the most important goal. Then, what is? Living in a way you can respect yourself for. Zara-Th pondered this as Marcus ran her through a series of simple diagnostic tests. Her leg was still tender but could bear weight, and the synthetic skin over her abdominal wound appeared to be integrating properly with her natural healing processes. According to his instruments, the infection was completely gone. I am in your debt, she said finally. Among the Veltar, a life debt is sacred. How may I repay you? You don't owe me anything. I most certainly do. You saved my life when my own people had written me off as dead. That creates an obligation that, no, Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. That's not how this works. I helped you because you needed help. Period. There's no debt, no obligation, no strings attached. Zara-Th felt her head ridges flush with confusion. But, without reciprocal obligation, altruistic behavior cannot be sustained in a social system. Eventually, those who give without receiving will be eliminated by those who take without giving. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But, that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem was that you were dying, and I could prevent that. So I did. Your people must be very wealthy to afford such inefficient resource allocation. Marcus actually laughed at that, a sound that was surprisingly pleasant despite coming from what was clearly a predator species. Wealthy? Hardly. Humans are known throughout the galaxy as scavengers and traders. We're too new to the galactic community to have established territories or trade monopolies. Most other species consider us barely civilized. Yet you possess advanced medical technology and a spacecraft capable of interstellar travel. Borrowed, salvaged, or jury-rigged from a dozen different sources, Marcus gestured around the medical bay. The life support system is Altarian, the surgical tools are vegan manufacture, and the diagnostic computers are repurposed Centauri mining equipment. Nothing on this ship is originally human except the crew. The crew? Just me, actually. I'm what you might call an independent operator. Zara-Th absorbed this information while Marcus helped her sit up fully and swing her legs off the examination table. If what he said was true, then he was essentially a lone scavenger operating a salvaged vessel with cobbled-together systems. Among the Veltar, such an individual would be considered the lowest form of life, barely above a parasite. Yet this same individual had possessed the skill to perform complex surgery on an alien species and the resources to equip a functional medical bay. The contradiction was puzzling. What kind of independent operation, she asked. Search and rescue, mostly. Sometimes salvage work if someone needs specific items recovered from dangerous areas. Occasionally I transport passengers who need to travel discreetly. And this is profitable? Profitable enough. I don't need much fuel, food, medical supplies, spare parts. The ship isn't fancy, but it gets the job done. Zara-Th attempted to stand and found that her leg, while painful, could support her weight with only minimal assistance. Marcus immediately moved to steady her, his touch careful and respectful. Search and rescue, she repeated thoughtfully. You actively seek out beings in distress? When I can find them, yes. Even when they cannot pay you? Especially then. The ones who can pay usually have other options. This was becoming more incomprehensible by the moment. Zarath had served in the Veltar military for over a decade and had encountered dozens of alien species during that time. None of them operated according to principles anything like what Marcus was describing. Are all humans like you? She asked. No, Marcus admitted. Some are better. Some are worse. Most are just trying to get by like everyone else. But we have this thing about leaving people behind. We don't like to do it. Even when it is the logical choice? Especially when it's the logical choice. Marcus helped her take a few experimental steps around the medical bay. Her leg held up reasonably well, though she would need to be careful not to strain it for several days. The abdominal wound was already feeling much better, and her general energy level was returning to something approaching normal. I still do not understand why you are helping me, Zarath said as they completed a slow circuit of the room. Because you needed help, Marcus repeated with what was clearly infinite patience. But why does that matter to you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, seeming to consider the question seriously. Have you ever had someone help you when you really needed it? He asked finally. Of course. Military units depend on mutual support for survival. No, I mean really help you. Not because it was tactically advantageous or part of their duty, but just because you were in trouble and they could do something about it. Zarath thought back through her life experiences. Fellow warriors had certainly aided her during battle, but that was expected behavior within a unit. Her family had provided support during her youth, but that was genetic obligation. Her superiors had given her opportunities for advancement, but that served their own interests by maintaining military effectiveness. No, she said slowly. I do not believe I have experienced what you describe. Well, now you have. But I am not even of your species. I was actively hostile when you first approached. By any measure, helping me was a poor allocation of your resources. Maybe. But resources aren't everything. Sometimes you do something because it's right, not because it's smart. Zarath found herself struggling with concepts that had no direct translation in her language or experience. The Veltar had words for duty, obligation, reciprocity, and genetic loyalty. But this idea of helping someone simply because they needed help, with no expectation of return or advantage, was alien to her entire worldview. Your species must be very young, she said finally. Young how? To maintain such inefficient behaviors, you cannot have faced significant evolutionary pressure. Once your population grows large enough to compete for limited resources, or once you encounter hostile species with superior tactical thinking, these charitable impulses will be eliminated by natural selection. Marcus smiled at that, an expression that involved baring his teeth but somehow managed to seem friendly rather than threatening. Humans have been competing for limited resources for about 200,000 years. We've fought wars that killed millions of our own people. We've survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and our own tendency to destroy everything we touch. We've been in space for less than 500 years, but in that time we've encountered 17 different hostile alien species and managed to avoid being exterminated by any of them. Then, how do you explain this behavior? Maybe because of all that, not despite it. When you've seen enough death and suffering, you start to value life differently. When you've been abandoned yourself, you remember what it feels like and try not to do it to others. Zarath absorbed this while Marcus helped her navigate the narrow corridor leading from the medical bay to what appeared to be the ship's main living area. It was as eclectic as the rest of the vessel, with furnishings and equipment from multiple species arranged in a way that somehow managed to feel comfortable rather than chaotic. Have you been abandoned? She asked. Marcus gestured for her to sit on what looked like a Regelian comfort couch, then moved to a small food preparation area. Coffee? Or I think I have some Altarian tea. You did not answer my question. No, I didn't. Marcus busied himself with the beverage preparation. Let's just say I understand what it feels like to be written off as not worth saving. Your own people? It's complicated. Zarath studied his posture and body language. Even with the communication barrier between species, she could recognize the signs of emotional pain carefully controlled. Whatever had happened to Marcus in his past, it had clearly influenced his present behavior in profound ways. "Is that why you do search and rescue?" she asked gently. "Because you were once in need of rescue yourself?" Marcus paused in his preparations, his shoulders tense. "Maybe. Partly. Does it matter? I am trying to understand you. Your behavior violates every principle of resource management and survival optimization I have ever been taught. Yet you are clearly not insane or suicidal. How do you know I'm not suicidal? Because you maintain your equipment too well. You take reasonable precautions for safety. You have long-term supplies and contingency plans." Zara Th gestured around the ship. "This is the vessel of someone who intends to keep living and working for the foreseeable future." Marcus brought her a steaming cup of something that smelled vaguely like the Altarian tea he had mentioned. "You're very observant. I am trained to assess tactical situations and evaluate potential threats or allies. You represent an anomaly." "What kind of anomaly?" "A dangerous one, potentially. If your species truly operates according to the principles you describe, you will disrupt established power structures wherever you go. Other species will not know how to predict or control human behavior. Is that necessarily bad?" Zara Th sipped the tea, which was surprisingly pleasant despite its alien origin. "Change is always dangerous. But perhaps not always bad." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Zara Th found herself evaluating everything she had been taught about optimal survival strategies and finding gaps in the logic she had never noticed before. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked eventually. "I do not know. I cannot return to my unit, they believe me dead, and my presence would only create complications for their mission. I cannot report to command, they would court-martial me for abandoning my post, even though the abandonment was not my choice." "You could come with me." The offer was made so casually that Zara Th almost missed its significance. When the meaning registered, she stared at Marcus in shock. "Come with you? As what?" "As whatever you want to be. I could use help with the ship maintenance, and another pair of hands would be useful for rescue operations. If you're interested in staying with the military life, there are always conflicts somewhere that need medics or tactical advisors." "You are offering me employment?" "I'm offering you options. Employment, partnership, temporary alliance, whatever works for you." Zara Th felt something she had never experienced before: genuine choice. In Veltar society, individual paths were determined by aptitude testing and societal need. Personal preferences were irrelevant. But Marcus seemed to be suggesting that she could simply decide what she wanted to do with her life. "I would have to learn human customs and procedures," she said slowly. "I'd have to learn Veltar ones too. We'd figure it out as we went along. My people would consider me a deserter. My people would consider me crazy for picking up alien strays. What other people think isn't always the most important factor." Zara Th looked around the ship's living area, taking in the evidence of Marcus's solitary existence. Books in multiple languages, entertainment systems from different species, personal items that spoke of someone who had made a life out of movement and change rather than stability and routine. "Why would you want a partner? You seem to have managed quite well on your own." "I have managed," Marcus agreed. "But that's not the same as living well. Having someone to watch your back, share the workload, talk through problems, that makes everything easier. Even someone from a species known for rigid hierarchy and military discipline? Especially someone with military training. I'm good at jury-rigging solutions and thinking on my feet, but I could use someone with your tactical background and disciplinary training." It was, Zara Th realized, the first time anyone had ever suggested that her military experience was valuable for something other than war. Among the Veltar, warriors were respected but limited, useful for conflict, but not considered suitable for civilian roles that required flexibility and creativity. "I would need time to consider your offer," she said finally. "Take all the time you need. You're welcome to stay here while you recover fully, regardless of what you decide afterward." "That is very generous. It's very practical." Injured crew members are inefficient crew members, whether they're permanent or temporary. Zara Th almost smiled at that. Marcus was learning to phrase his altruism in terms she could understand. "You are beginning to sound like a proper resource manager." Don't let that get around. It would ruin my reputation. This time Zara Th did smile, the first genuine expression of humor she had felt since the crash. It was a strange sensation, sitting in an alien ship drinking alien tea with an alien who had saved her life for no logical reason, contemplating a future she had never imagined possible. Marcus, she said thoughtfully. What is Earth like? Blue and green and completely insane, he replied without hesitation. Too many people, not enough space, politics that change faster than the weather, and a tendency to solve problems by hitting them really hard until they go away or break completely. It sounds chaotic. It is. But it's also beautiful in ways that are hard to explain. Maybe someday you'll get to see it for yourself. Perhaps I will. Outside the ship's viewports, the twin suns of Kepler 442b were beginning to rise again, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Soon, both the Veltar and Rektar forces would resume their eternal conflict, fighting over resources and territory with mathematical precision and tactical brilliance. But, inside the small, jury-rigged vessel, two beings from different worlds were discovering that sometimes the most important calculations couldn't be reduced to numbers and logic. Sometimes, the only equation that mattered was simple: someone needed help, and someone else could provide it. Everything else, as Marcus had said, was tomorrow's problem. 3 weeks later, Zara Th stood in the cargo bay of Marcus's ship, watching him attempt to repair a malfunctioning gravity compensator with what appeared to be spare parts from a food processor and some kind of alien duct tape. The sight would have horrified any properly trained Veltar engineer, but she had to admit the results were surprisingly effective. Hand me that plasma coupling, Marcus called from somewhere inside the machinery. The blue one with the twisted connectors. Zara Th located the requested component and passed it to him. You realize this entire repair violates approximately 17 different safety protocols? Probably 18, but who's counting? Marcus's voice was muffled by the compensator housing. Safety protocols are written by people who've never had to fix critical systems with whatever happens to be lying around. They are written by people who preferred their spaceships to remain intact during operation. The ship's been intact for 6 years using repairs like this. Sometimes engineering textbooks don't account for real-world limitations. Zara Th had learned to appreciate this aspect of human problem-solving over the past weeks. Where Veltar training emphasized following established procedures to ensure predictable results, Marcus approached each challenge as a unique puzzle requiring creative solutions. It was inefficient, illogical, and somehow remarkably effective. Try activating the secondary power coupling, she suggested, checking the diagnostic readings on her handheld scanner. The compensator hummed to life with a sound that was almost, but not quite, like it was supposed to make. Marcus emerged from the machinery wearing a satisfied expression and a liberal coating of lubricant stains. Not bad for 18 safety violations, he said, wiping his hands on an already dirty cloth. We'll need to find replacement parts eventually, but this should hold us for another few months. Zara Th made a note in the maintenance log they had started keeping together. Her military training had proved invaluable for organizing the ship's operations, while Marcus's experience had taught her to think beyond rigid protocols when circumstances demanded flexibility. The distress beacon is still active, she reported, checking the communications panel. Same coordinates as yesterday. Any change in the signal strength? Minimal degradation. Whatever is generating the signal still has power, but probably not for much longer. Marcus studied the star charts they had spread across a work table. The distress beacon was coming from a system that was technically within Rektar space, though far from any major shipping routes or military installations. According to their intelligence, the area had been largely abandoned following a resource depletion survey that showed nothing worth extracting. It could be a trap, Zara Th pointed out, not for the first time. Rektar raiders have been known to use false distress signals to lure salvage vessels into ambushes. Could be, Marcus agreed. But the signal pattern doesn't match standard Rektar military codes. It's definitely an automated emergency beacon, and the power signature suggests it's been running for at least several weeks. Long enough for anyone who wanted to respond to have already done so. Which means either no one received it, or no one thought it was worth the risk. Zara Th examined the tactical data they had gathered. The system in question was positioned near the edge of a nebula that interfered with long-range sensors and communications. A ship could easily become stranded there if its navigation systems failed or if it suffered engine damage while trying to transit the nebular boundary. Estimated travel time, she asked. For days at maximum safe speed, accounting for the navigation hazards in that region. And estimated likelihood that we will find survivors? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. Low. But not zero. It was the kind of calculation that would have been simple for any Veltar commander. The potential risk to their own vessel and crew clearly outweighed the minimal probability of rescuing viable survivors. Any reasonable tactical analysis would recommend ignoring the distress beacon and continuing to safer hunting grounds. But Zara-TH had learned that humans rarely made reasonable tactical decisions. When do we leave? She asked. Marcus looked up from the star charts with surprise. You're willing to go? You are going regardless of what I say. I have observed your behavioral patterns long enough to predict that much. The only question is whether I will be there to provide tactical support when you inevitably encounter complications. It could be dangerous. Everything we do could be dangerous. That is why we maintain weapons systems and defensive protocols. Marcus smiled at the expression that still looked predatory to her Veltar sensibilities but which she had learned to interpret as pleasure or approval. I'm glad you decided to stay. I have not yet formally decided anything, Zara-TH protested. I am still evaluating the arrangement. Of course you are. They had been having this same conversation, with minor variations, for the past 2 weeks. Zara-TH maintained that her presence on the ship was temporary while she considered her options. Marcus accepted this fiction with good humor while continuing to make plans that clearly assumed her permanent participation. The truth was that Zara-TH had made her decision within the first few days of recovery. The work was challenging, the living conditions were far below military standards, and Marcus's casual disregard for safety protocols gave her anxiety attacks on a regular basis. It was also the most intellectually stimulating and personally satisfying experience of her adult life. We should prepare for a long-range reconnaissance mission, she said, moving to check their supply inventories. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts for critical systems. And emergency rations in case we get stranded ourselves. Obviously. They had developed an efficient division of labor during their time together. Marcus handled navigation, communications, and the bewildering array of jury-rig repairs that kept the ship functional. Zara-TH managed tactical assessment, resource allocation, and the organizational systems that prevented their eclectic operation from collapsing into complete chaos. It was, she had to admit, a surprisingly effective partnership. Question, Marcus said as they began pulling supplies from the ship's storage compartments. What happens if we rescue someone and they turn out to be Hrektar? Zara-TH paused in her inventory checking. It was a scenario they had not specifically discussed, though the possibility had been implicit in their planning. The Hrektar were technically enemies of the Veltar Confederation, and her military oath required her to treat captured enemy personnel as prisoners of war. What would you do? She asked instead of answering. Same thing I'd do if they were Veltar or any other species. Patch them up, get them to safety, let them make their own decisions about what happens next. Even if they had been shooting at you the day before? Even then, Zara-TH considered this. Your species truly makes no distinction between friend and enemy when providing medical assistance? Medical ethics are pretty universal among humans. You help the injured, regardless of who they are or what side they're on. You can sort out the political complications afterward. That seems impractical. Maybe. But it's also the only way to maintain any kind of moral authority. If you only help people who agree with you, you're not really helping people, you're just supporting your own side. This was another aspect of human thinking that Zara-TH struggled to understand. Veltar society was built on clear distinctions between allies and enemies, with corresponding obligations and restrictions. The idea that medical assistance should be provided without regard to political affiliation was not just impractical, it was potentially treasonous. If we encounter Hrektar survivors, she said slowly, I cannot guarantee my response will be neutral. I'm not asking you to be neutral. I'm just asking you to let me do the medical work before you make any tactical decisions. It was a reasonable compromise, and one that acknowledged the genuine conflict between her military training and the humanitarian principles that seemed to drive Marcus's behavior. Zara-TH found herself grateful for his willingness to work within the constraints of her background rather than demanding that she abandon everything she had been taught. Agreed, she said. But, if they prove to be hostile, I will defend the ship and crew with lethal force. Wouldn't expect anything less. They completed their mission preparations in companionable silence, each focused on their respective areas of expertise. Zara Th ran diagnostic checks on their weapon systems and defensive screens while Marcus calculated jump coordinates and filed a flight plan with the nearest traffic control authority. Departure in 2 hours, he announced as he finished the navigation programming. Transit time to the beacon location is approximately 96 hours, assuming no complications. There will be complications, Zara Th said matter-of-factly. There are always complications. Probably. But that's what makes it interesting. Zara Th was beginning to understand that humans had a peculiar relationship with uncertainty and risk. Where her people sought to minimize variables and maintain control over outcomes, Marcus seemed to actively enjoy the challenge of adapting to unexpected developments. It was a mindset that should have been evolutionary suicide, but somehow it seemed to work for him. Marcus, she said as they secured the cargo bay for departure. Why do you enjoy this work? What do you mean? Search and rescue operations are dangerous, often unsuccessful, and rarely profitable. Yet you pursue them with enthusiasm rather than mere obligation. I am trying to understand what motivates such behavior. Marcus leaned against a storage container, considering the question. Have you ever saved someone's life? In combat, yes. Fellow warriors who would have died without immediate medical attention. How did it feel? Tactically satisfying. A preserved asset increases unit effectiveness and mission completion probability. That's not what I meant. Zara Th thought back to those moments, dragging wounded comrades to safety while under enemy fire, applying emergency medical techniques to injuries that could have been fatal if left untreated. She had always framed the experiences in terms of duty and tactical necessity. But, if she was honest with herself, there had been something else. A sense of rightness that went beyond military efficiency. I felt useful, she said finally. Not just as a warrior following orders, but as an individual making a meaningful difference. That's why I do this work. Because every once in a while, you get to be the difference between someone living and dying. You get to be the reason someone makes it home to their family, or gets a chance to try again, or simply gets to see another sunrise. But, most of the time, you arrive too late to help. Most of the time, yes. But, not every time. And, the times when you do make a difference, they make all the other times worth it. Zara Th absorbed this as they completed their final preparations. It was a perspective that prioritized individual meaning over statistical outcomes, personal satisfaction over resource efficiency. By any rational measure, it was a poor foundation for decision-making. But, there was something appealing about the idea that her actions could have meaning beyond their immediate tactical value. The ship is ready for departure, she reported as they completed their pre-flight checklist. Then, let's go find out who needs help. The ship lifted off smoothly, its patchwork systems humming with the particular harmony that indicated everything was working within acceptable parameters. As they climbed through the atmosphere toward the jump point, Zara Th found herself looking forward to the mission ahead with something approaching excitement. It was an emotion she had rarely experienced during her military service, where missions were obligations to be completed rather than opportunities to be embraced. But, working with Marcus had taught her that there were other ways to serve, other reasons to risk danger for the sake of others. Initiating jump sequence, Marcus announced from the pilot station. The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of light, and space folded around them as the ship transitioned into hyperspace. For days to their destination, and whatever waited for them there. Zara Th settled into her station and began monitoring the ship's systems for any signs of stress or malfunction. Beside her, Marcus hummed one of his wordless melodies while managing the navigation controls with practiced ease. Despite the uncertainty of their mission and the genuine dangers they might face, Zara Th realized she was content in a way she had never been during her military career. Not because the work was easier or safer, but because it had a purpose that went beyond simple survival or territorial conquest. For the first time in her life, she was part of something that created rather than destroyed, that built connections rather than enforcing divisions. It was, she thought, a very human way to live. And, perhaps not such a bad one after all. The distress beacon led them to a ship that should not have existed. Zara Th stared at the sensor readings, running the scans 3 times to confirm what she was seeing. The vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of any military ship she had served on, but its configuration matched no known design in her databases. The hull showed evidence of multiple species construction techniques, with sections that appeared to be Veltar, Rectar, Centauri, and at least 4 other architectural styles she could identify. "It's a colony ship," Marcus said quietly, his face pale as he studied the tactical display. "A refugee transport. Impossible. No one builds colony ships anymore. The resource requirements alone, look at the construction dates." Marcus highlighted sections of the hull with different sensor colorations. "This wasn't built all at once. It's been added to over time, expanded and modified as more groups joined whatever this is." Zara-TH studied the data more carefully. The ship's oldest sections showed were patterns consistent with decades of use, while newer additions still bore the marks of recent construction. It was less a single vessel than a floating city that had grown organically over time. "Life signs?" she asked. "Approximately 12,000 individuals, representing. I count at least 8 different species. Maybe more, some of these biosignatures don't match anything in our database." 12,000 refugees from multiple species, traveling together on a ship that defied conventional engineering principles. It was the kind of scenario that military planners dismissed as impossible because the logistics were too complex and the political arrangements too unstable to maintain. Yet here it was, drifting powerless in space with a failing distress beacon. "Their main reactor is offline," Marcus reported as more sensor data came in. "Life support is running on emergency power, but it won't last much longer. Maybe 18 hours before they start losing atmosphere." "What about their own repair capabilities?" "Minimal. I'm reading damage to their engineering sections that suggests they've been trying to fix the reactor for days without success." Zara-TH ran tactical calculations in her head. 12,000 individuals represented a massive rescue operation, far beyond the capabilities of a single small ship like theirs. Even if they could somehow effect repairs to the colony vessel's reactor, the diplomatic complications of dealing with refugees from multiple species would be staggering. "We need to call for help," she said finally. "Alert the nearest military authorities, civilian rescue services, anybody with ships large enough to handle an evacuation of this scale." "I already tried. We're too close to the nebular boundary, our communications are being blocked by the same interference that probably prevented their distress beacon from reaching anyone until now. Then, we need to move to clearer space and transmit from there." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the colony ship's position relative to the nebula. "By the time we reach clear space, transmit for help, and wait for rescue ships to arrive, their life support will have failed. They'll all be dead." Zara-TH felt the familiar weight of impossible tactical choices. Save the many by abandoning the few, or risk everything in a futile attempt to help everyone. It was the same calculation her own people had made when they left her behind on Kepler 442b. "There must be another option," she said, though she could not imagine what it might be. "There is. We go aboard and try to fix their reactor ourselves." "Marcus, there are 12,000 people on that ship. Even if we could repair their reactor, we don't have the supplies or equipment to address their other needs. This is beyond what a 2-person crew can handle." "Maybe. But we're the only option they have right now." Zara-TH looked at the human sitting beside her, recognizing the expression she had learned to associate with his more reckless humanitarian impulses. "You're serious?" "Completely. The odds of success are minimal. But not zero. If we fail, we'll be trapped on a dead ship with 12,000 corpses. If we don't try, we'll spend the rest of our lives knowing we could have tried." It was the same argument he had made when they first met, help because help is needed, regardless of the practical calculations. Zara-TH had thought she understood the principle, but applying it to a situation of this magnitude revealed its true implications. A rational person would cut their losses and leave. A human, apparently, would attempt the impossible. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Marcus smiled, that predatory expression that no longer seemed threatening. "Help me figure out how to save 12,000 refugees with a cargo hold full of spare parts and an unhealthy disregard for safety protocols." They spent the next hour reviewing everything they could learn about the colony ship from external scans. Its reactor design appeared to be Centauri-based, which was fortunate since Marcus had experience working with similar systems. The failure pattern suggested a cascade breakdown in the magnetic containment field, serious, but potentially reparable if they could access the right components. The bad news is that we'll need to shut down their entire power grid to effect repairs, Marcus explained as they suited up for EVA transfer. That means temporary loss of life support throughout the ship. How temporary? If everything goes perfectly? Maybe 4 hours. If we run into complications, longer. Zara TH checked her environmental suit's power supply and emergency oxygen reserves. 12,000 people cannot survive 4 hours without life support. Not all of them, no. But the ship has emergency shelters scattered throughout its structure areas with independent power and air recycling. If they rotate people through those shelters in shifts, they might be able to keep most of their population alive long enough for us to complete the repairs. Might. It's the best plan I can come up with. Zara TH sealed her helmet and performed final equipment checks. Then, we should implement it quickly, before I remember why this is insane. The transfer to the colony ship proved easier than expected. Despite its improvised appearance, the vessel maintained proper docking protocols and even provided automated guidance for their approach. Whoever commanded the ship clearly had experience with rescue operations. The individual who met them at the airlock reinforced this impression. I am Captain Draktha, the figure announced in accented but fluent Galactic standard. Commander of the vessel New Haven and representative of the Free Colonies Coalition. Zara TH studied their host with professional interest. Draktha appeared to be Altarian, with the characteristic blue-gray skin and elongated limbs of that species. But their uniform showed modifications that suggested experience with multiple military traditions, and their bearing indicated someone accustomed to command authority. I am Marcus, and this is Zara TH. We received your distress beacon. 2 individuals in a light transport vessel. Draktha's tone was carefully neutral. I appreciate your response, but I fear this situation requires resources beyond what you can provide. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But we'd like to try anyway. Can you show us to your reactor compartment? What followed was a tour through sections of the ship that defied everything Zara TH had been taught about spacecraft design. Corridors connected areas built according to different architectural principles, with life support systems that had been jury-rigged to accommodate the atmospheric requirements of multiple species. Living quarters ranged from Veltar-style military barracks to Centauri family pods to configurations she did not recognize. How long has this ship been operating? She asked as they navigated through what appeared to be a marketplace where vendors from different species traded goods and services. The original hull was constructed 19 standard years ago, Draktha replied. Since then, we have added new sections as groups have joined our coalition. What kind of coalition? Refugees, primarily. Individuals and families displaced by various conflicts throughout this region of space. We provide transport to new worlds where they can establish permanent settlements. Marcus paused to examine a section where Hrektar construction techniques had been integrated with what looked like human welding patterns. Humans have joined your coalition? A small group, yes. They were among our most recent additions. Excellent engineers, though their approach to safety protocols requires constant supervision. Zara TH caught Marcus's eye and saw her own amusement reflected there. Apparently, human disregard for engineering standards was consistent across the species. The reactor compartment was located in the ship's original Centauri section, a vast chamber filled with machinery that hummed with barely contained energy. Or had hummed, now it sat silent, its magnetic containment fields dark and its power output reading 0. We've attempted repairs for the past 6 days, Draktha explained. Our engineering teams represent 4 different technical traditions, but none of them can identify the specific failure point. Marcus spent 20 minutes examining the reactor's control systems while Zara TH reviewed the technical logs of previous repair attempts. The pattern that emerged was frustratingly familiar. Each engineering team had approached the problem according to their own training, resulting in a series of partial solutions that interfered with each other. The containment field generator is still functional, Marcus announced. The problem is in the power distribution network. Someone tried to reroute around the damaged sections using Hrektar protocols, but they didn't account for the different voltage requirements of the Centauri systems. Can you correct it? Yes, but it means shutting down all power to recalibrate the network. That includes life support. Draktha was quiet for a moment. For how long? Minimum 4 hours. Possibly longer if we discover additional problems. I will need to consult with the other sector representatives. A decision of this magnitude requires consensus. While Draktha went to organize their leadership council, Marcus and Zara-Th used the time to gather intelligence about the ship's population and resources. What they learned was both inspiring and sobering. The Free Colonies Coalition represented the most successful refugee resettlement program in the known galaxy. Over the past 2 decades, they had transported more than 50,000 displaced individuals to new worlds where they could rebuild their lives. Their ship was essentially a mobile city, complete with schools, hospitals, workshops, and even small manufacturing facilities. It was also desperately overcrowded and operating far beyond its designed capacity. They've been taking on refugees faster than they can find places to settle them, Zara-Th observed as they reviewed the population manifests. At current rates, they'll exceed life support capacity within another year. Which is probably why they're willing to take the risk of experimental reactor repairs, Marcus replied. They need to keep moving or the whole system collapses. And if our repairs fail? Then, 12,000 people die who might have lived longer if we hadn't tried to help. It was the fundamental uncertainty of rescue work, the possibility that good intentions could lead to worse outcomes than no action at all. Zara-Th was beginning to understand why humans found this type of work both addictive and emotionally exhausting. The council has reached a decision, Draktha announced upon returning. We will attempt the reactor repairs. The alternative is slow death rather than quick death, but the outcome is the same. Then, let's get started, Marcus said. We'll need teams to manage the emergency shelters and coordinate population rotation. And I'll need access to your spare parts inventory. This repair is going to require improvisation. What followed was 4 of the most intense hours of Zara-Th's life. The reactor shutdown went smoothly, but the subsequent repair work revealed a cascade of problems that had been masked by the original failure. Components that had seemed functional were operating far outside normal parameters. Safety systems had been disabled or bypassed so many times that it was impossible to determine what was supposed to happen under emergency conditions. This entire power grid is held together with determination and prayer, Marcus muttered as he traced voltage pathways through a control panel that appeared to have been rebuilt at least 3 times. Will it work? It's working right now, sort of. The question is whether it will keep working after we fix the main problem. Meanwhile, Zara-Th coordinated with the ship's emergency response teams to manage the population rotation through pressurized shelters. It was a logistical nightmare involving 8 different species with varying atmospheric requirements, but the coalition's people handled it with practiced efficiency. They've done this before, she realized as she watched families calmly gathering essential supplies before moving to temporary shelters. Emergency drills are a regular part of life on refugee ships, Draktha explained. We've learned to be prepared for system failures. The reactor restart sequence began after 3 hours and 47 minutes of repair work. Marcus had managed to stabilize the power distribution network using components salvaged from a dozen different systems, creating a configuration that violated virtually every engineering standard Zara-Th knew. But the containment fields activated on the first try. Power flowed back through the ship's systems, and life support came online with a gentle hum that was answered by cheers from the emergency shelters. Reactor output is nominal, Marcus reported, monitoring the startup sequence. All systems are operating within acceptable parameters. Define acceptable, Zara-Th said, studying readings that fluctuated more than she liked. Acceptable means we're not going to explode in the next few days. Long-term stability is a different question. It was, she reflected, a very human definition of success. The celebration in the ship's central plaza was unlike anything Zara-Th had ever experienced. Representatives of 8 different species gathered together, sharing food and music and stories in a mixture of languages that somehow managed to communicate joy across cultural barriers. You saved us all, a young Centauri engineer told Marcus. How can we repay such a debt? Just keep helping people, Marcus replied. Pass it forward to someone else who needs it. As they prepared to depart, Draktha made them an offer that Zara-Th had not expected. The coalition could use a ship like yours, the captain said. Small, fast, able to respond to emergencies while the main vessel focuses on transport. We would provide supplies, maintenance support, and crew rotation if needed. It was an opportunity to become part of something larger than their small 2-person operation. A chance to make their rescue work more systematic and effective. What do you think? Marcus asked Zara-Th privately. She looked around at the thriving community they had helped preserve. Families from different worlds living together, children playing games that mix traditions from multiple species, engineers from former enemy civilizations working side by side to solve common problems. I think, she said slowly, that this is what the galaxy should look like. Is that a yes? That is a yes. When they transmitted their acceptance to Draktha, the captain smiled, an expression that crossed species lines without translation. Welcome to the coalition, Draktha said. I think you'll find that humans fit right in. As their ship took up position alongside New Haven, beginning a new chapter in their partnership, Zara-Th reflected on how much her understanding of the universe had changed since that day on Kepler 442b. She had thought the galaxy was a place where the strong survived by abandoning the weak. She had learned it could also be a place where the strong survived by helping each other. It was, she decided, a much better way to live. 6 months after joining the Free Colonies Coalition, Zara-Th found herself standing in the command center of New Haven, staring at a tactical display that showed something impossible, a Veltar battle cruiser requesting permission to dock. It's the VCS Thunderbolt, reported Kesare, a young Rektar communications specialist whose family had joined the coalition 3 years earlier. Captain Veknal is requesting immediate conference with coalition leadership. Zara-Th felt her blood turn cold. Veknal had been her commanding officer during 2 tours of duty, a rigid disciplinarian who viewed any deviation from protocol as a personal affront. If he was here, it meant the Veltar Confederation had finally taken official notice of the coalition's activities. Are they alone? Asked Draktha, studying the sensor readings with professional calm. Yes, sir. No escort vessels, no support fleet. But they're maintaining full defensive posture. Zara-Th, Draktha turned to her. Your assessment? She studied the tactical data, applying her military training to evaluate potential threats. The Thunderbolt was heavily armed and could easily destroy New Haven in a direct confrontation, but it was also operating far from any Veltar support bases. If Veknal had hostile intentions, he would have brought a full squadron. This is a reconnaissance mission, she concluded. They want information, not a fight. Information about what? About us. About how a ship full of refugees from enemy species has managed to operate freely in contested space without being destroyed by any of the major powers. Marcus emerged from the engineering section where he had been working with the human technical crew. Over the past months, the small group of human engineers had become essential to the coalition's operations, their willingness to ignore safety protocols proving invaluable for maintaining New Haven's jury-rigged systems. What's the situation? He asked, taking in the tense atmosphere of the command center. Veltar military vessel requesting permission to dock, Zara-Th explained. My former commanding officer wants to have a conversation. Are we giving him one? We don't have much choice. They could disable our engines before we could reach jump distance. So we're trapped? We're committed, Draktha corrected. There's a difference. The Thunderbolt docked with the smooth precision that characterized all Veltar military operations. Captain Veknal came aboard with a small honor guard, their uniforms crisp and their weapons conspicuously visible. Zara-Th watched from the observation deck as they were escorted through the ship's central plaza, noting how the captain's expression changed as he observed the coalition's impossible diversity. Veltar, Rektar, Centauri, Altarian, and human families mingled freely in the marketplace below. Children played together regardless of species, while their parents conducted business in a mixture of languages that had evolved into its own unique pidgin dialect. Engineers from traditionally hostile civilizations collaborated on technical problems with casual efficiency. It was everything that conventional military wisdom said should be impossible. He looks confused, Marcus observed, studying Veknal's body language. He's trying to identify the command structure, Zara-Th explained. In his worldview, this many different species can only coexist under strict hierarchical control. He cannot understand how we maintain order without someone being clearly in charge. Who is in charge? That's what he's trying to figure out. The formal meeting took place in New Haven's main conference chamber, with representatives from each member species present. Zara-Th sat with the human delegation, wearing civilian clothes that felt strange after years of military uniforms. Across the table, Veknal maintained the rigid posture that had intimidated junior officers throughout his career. I am here, he began without preamble, to investigate reports of Veltar military personnel collaborating with enemy species. Draktha responded with diplomatic courtesy. Captain Veknal, I welcome you aboard New Haven. We are honored by your visit. This is not a social call. I have intelligence reports indicating that at least one Veltar citizen has joined this coalition. I am here to determine whether charges of treason are warranted. Silence fell over the conference chamber. Zara Th felt the weight of multiple gazes as representatives from different species awaited her response. The moment she had been dreading since joining the coalition had finally arrived. I am here, Captain, she said quietly. Vekanal's eyes locked onto hers with the intensity she remembered from military briefings. Warrior Zara Th, designation VTC 7751. Reported killed in action on Kepler 442b during combat operations against Rektar forces. I was abandoned on Kepler 442b when my unit determined that my injuries made me a liability to their mission. You were presumed dead following the loss of communication with your scout team. Your commanding officer made a tactically sound decision to withdraw rather than risk additional casualties in a futile search effort. He made a mathematically optimal decision that prioritized his surviving personnel over a wounded warrior who might slow their retreat. Vekanal's expression did not change, but Zara Th detected a slight tightening around his eyes. And how did you survive? Zara Th glanced at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. I was rescued by a human search and rescue specialist who refused to abandon an injured person, even though helping me offered him no tactical advantage. A human. Vekanal's tone made the word sound like a disease. And, in gratitude for this assistance, you chose to betray your people by joining their coalition? I chose to join a coalition dedicated to helping refugees from multiple species find new homes and rebuild their lives. The same coalition that has relocated over 50,000 displaced individuals during the past 2 decades. Individuals who should have been processed through proper military and diplomatic channels. Individuals who would have died while waiting for those channels to process their cases. The exchange continued for nearly an hour, with Vekanal attempting to establish that Zara Th's actions constituted treason and Zara Th defending the coalition's humanitarian mission. But, as the discussion progressed, something unexpected happened. Other coalition members began sharing their own stories. Kesare described how her family had fled Rektar space when her father refused to participate in the execution of civilian prisoners. Dr. Yanthali, a Centauri physician, explained how the coalition's mobile medical facilities had treated refugees who had been denied care by their own governments. Even some of the humans contributed stories of displacement and persecution that had led them to seek sanctuary with the coalition. Vekanal listened to these testimonies with the same rigid attention he had always brought to military briefings. But Zara Th noticed subtle changes in his posture as the stories accumulated, a slight relaxation in his shoulders, a thoughtful expression when he thought no one was watching. These are individual cases, he said finally. Anecdotal evidence cannot justify wholesale abandonment of established legal frameworks. With respect, Captain, Dr. Yanthali interjected, what legal frameworks exist for a Rektar family seeking asylum in Veltar space? What diplomatic protocols cover medical treatment for Altarian refugees traveling through Centauri territory? Those are matters for governments to negotiate. And, while governments negotiate, people die. Marcus had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, but now he leaned forward slightly. Captain Vekanal, may I ask you a question? Vekanal's gaze shifted to the human with obvious distaste. You may ask. How many rescue operations have you commanded during your military career? I fail to see the relevance of that question. Humor me. Vekanal was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating whether to answer. 17 major operations. 43 minor interventions. Any civilians? When circumstances required it. Did you ever have to choose between saving someone and following orders? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vekanal's expression remained neutral, but Zara Th could see the internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. Military personnel face such choices regularly, he said finally. And, what did you choose? I chose to fulfill my duty to my people and my chain of command. Always? The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. When Vekanal spoke again, his voice was quieter than before. There was a colony transport that suffered catastrophic system failures in the Rytal sector. 40,000 civilians, including families of military personnel. My orders were to secure a strategic mining installation before enemy forces could capture it. Zara Th felt her chest tighten as she recognized the implications of what he was describing. The mining installation was ultimately of minimal strategic value, Vecanael continued. But, the colony transport was outside my operational area. Assisting them would have required abandoning my assigned mission. What did you do? Marcus asked gently. I completed my assigned mission. The mining installation was secured. The colony transport was rescued 6 hours later by a civilian cargo hauler that happened to be in the area. 6 hours later? 12,000 civilians died during those 6 hours. Including the families of personnel under my command. The confession seemed to drain something vital from Vecanael. His rigid military posture remained, but his expression had changed in ways that suggested deep, long-buried pain. Orders are orders, he said quietly. Military discipline requires absolute obedience to the chain of command. Any other approach leads to chaos and defeat. Does it? Marcus asked. Or does it sometimes lead to situations where following orders means